In an era where the truth can be altered with money, there lurks a shadow so vast, it threatens to take over the very essence of human progression. This shadow is cast by none other than the oil and energy industry, who have not only shaped our energy landscape, but have also dimmed the lights of potential breakthroughs that dare to challenge its dominion. Let's take a second. Imagine, if you will, a world where a man discovers a new way to harness energy that was good for the planet. A revolutionary technology capable of powering cities with nothing but the abundant resources found in nature. You see, this isn't science fiction. There are people who've already done it.
A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
And frankly, it's an inevitable future, and it's one that big oil fights tooth and nail to suppress. Picture this. You're now in the shoes of an oil titan like Shell, ExxonMobil, and British Petroleum, boasting revenues that dwarf the economies of entire nations. Your influence extends beyond the realms of energy, into the very corridors of power where policies are made and futures are decided. Life at the top is unchallenged, and the status quo is your playground. But yet, amidst your oil empire, a threat emerges. A young team of engineers and scientists have just found a patent that could turn the energy market upside down. Their invention? An efficient way to harness energy from the environment. Clean, limitless, and most importantly, free. But innovation is a threat when you're the reigning monarch of energy, so as you sit on your throne, what's your move? It was to deny, slander, and suppress, of course. That young team of visionaries, suddenly, they found themselves caught in a web of legal battles, slander, and sabotage. Their patent was now challenged by a congression of corporate lawyers skilled in the war of lawsuits. There were allegations of infringement, safety concerns, and regulatory hurdles that magically appeared from thin air, slowing down any promise of change. And the media? It was completely under your control. All you'd have to do was pay off a few journalists and news stations and the job was done. They stood ready to cast doubt on this new technology, highlighting its unproven nature and potential risks to public safety. All the while, behind the scenes, you had lobbyists work tirelessly to ensure regulations to favor your monopoly, keeping the new threatening technology from ever reaching the masses. But suppression is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, it's like John D. Rockefeller once said, competition is a sin. This is Big Oil's death grip, how they kill the competition. In the early days of innovation, the battleground wasn't just about better technology, but the very right to shape the future. As we peel back the layers of the lengths businesses will go to make money, a question emerges. In the pursuit of progress, whose interests are we really serving? In the world of business and energy, the story of big oil is one of the most fascinating. These companies aren't just about drilling and selling oil, they've been major players in global politics and have had a big say in how we use our energy resources. Think about companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Shell, and Total Energies. They're not just logos you see at gas stations, they're huge forces in the energy world. Their journeys didn't start in offices, but in the vast open lands far from their company addresses. A key moment was the formation of the Consortium for Iran, a group that really set the stage for these companies that at the time were known as the Seven Sisters that controlled the world's oil. These companies were Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, Gulf Oil, Shell, Standard Oil of California, Esso, ExxonMobil, and Texaco. They did more than just find oil, they shaped the politics and economies of the 20th century. From the 1930s, these companies had a big say in how oil was produced and sold. They pretty much owned the rights to the oil in places like Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the Persian Gulf. Believe it or not, they worked together to make sure they all stayed in control, setting up companies like the Iraq Petroleum Company to keep things running smoothly and avoid stepping on each other's toes. And over time, the Seven Sisters was coined Big Oil, a term that reflected not just their economic power, but also how they influence politics and environmental policies. The big companies today, which have come from the Seven Sisters, are still very influential, even as the world starts to think about the impact of using oil on the environment. In fact, Douglas Terrason of Morgan Stanley in 1998 had predicted that big oil companies would merge and become even more powerful. And that's exactly what happened, making these companies key players in global energy. However, as big oil became larger, you were now facing new challenges. Climate change, the growth of renewable energy sources, and a push for a more sustainable world were now applying more pressure. You see, just as big oil had amassed control, you had amassed three big problems as well that big oil companies had to deal with. First, you had to work together to make sure that oil prices stayed high. This meant everyone putting their pride aside and not undercutting the market, and coordinating their efforts across the globe. which wasn't always easy. The second challenge was about dealing with the countries where the oil was. These companies wanted to pay as little as possible in taxes and royalties to these countries. To help with this, the British and American governments often stepped in to push these countries to agree to the company's terms. When a country tried to ask for more money through taxes or royalties, the oil companies had a strategy. They would just produce less oil there and move their operations to countries where it was cheaper. This put pressure on countries to not ask for too much, keeping taxes and royalties low for the big oil companies. But countries that had oil faced their own problems when they thought about taking control of oil from these companies. Some weren't independent yet and were still under the control of other empires. Others had leaders put in place by powerful countries and companies, making it hard for them to stand up against these big powers. Many didn't have the money or the know-how to run the oil business all on their own. They also worried about being cut off from selling their oil in North America and Europe if they took over oil production for themselves. In 1951, Iran made the decision to take control of its oil industry from the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, now known as British Petroleum. This led to a big international problem with other countries refusing to buy any Iranian oil. So to solve this, the US suggested setting up a group of major oil companies to manage Iran's oil, including some companies that were part of the original Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And just like that, you had now seeped right back into the cracks where you were kicked out from. But lastly, just as you decided to get comfortable, something stood in your way. A new challenger and enemy that was even better than big oil itself stood before you. It was a new scientific discovery that no longer relied on fossil fuels at all. You knew this was a serious problem. With this new technology that was better for the environment and free, Standard Oil would become useless and obsolete in only a few years. It would be the destruction of your empire and the death of your fortune. You couldn't let this happen. You needed every car, every boat, and every plane in the world to use your oil. So how would you do it? How would you craft a plan to make sure your legacy would continue? It's simple. You'd kill anyone who stood in your way. Meet Stanley Meyer. Stanley Meyer, born on August 24th, 1940, was a kid from Columbus, Ohio's east side. He was a twin with his brother Stephen by his side from the start. As kids, the Meyer brothers grew up in a world of their own making, turning their backyards into laboratories and their imaginations into blueprints. As a teen moving to Grandview Heights, Stanley wrapped up his high school years and took a brief dive into Ohio State University before answering the call to serve in the military. Stephen Meyer remembers their childhood with a sense of wonder, noting, "We were always building something. It wasn't just about playing with toys, it was about making them, understanding them, and in many ways transcending them. This wasn't your average tinkering, it was a foundation for a life of invention and curiosity." Stanley always had a presence that was hard to ignore. He had the rare gift of bridging worlds, equally at ease discussing complex theories with physicists as he was explaining his latest invention to a friend who laid bricks for a living. His charisma wasn't just surface level, it was deep. It was a reflection of a mind that was always racing, always dreaming, and always looking for the next problem to solve. But one fateful day, Stanley Meyer's life would change forever. Stanley Meyer's journey from an inventive genius to the subject of international intrigue is marked by groundbreaking achievements and speculation of foul play. He quickly became recognized globally for his pioneering work and was named the Inventor of the Year in Who's Who of America in 1993. Stanley's quest to transform water into a viable fuel source was what catapulted him into the scientific spotlight. In the wake of the 1974 Arab oil embargo, with its soaring gas prices and widespread panic, Meyer embarked on a mission that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Stanley had created a technology in which he called the water fuel cell. This was supposed to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then use the hydrogen to make energy. Many scientists and engineers watched his invention work and were amazed by how well it seemed to do. But his claims were met with skepticism by the scientific community, while also validated by eyewitnesses. They attested that Meyer's device produced a hydrogen and oxygen mix in quantities that defied conventional expectations. Despite the acclaim, Meyer's career was a roller coaster of highs and lows. He was kind and generous, yet also paranoid and suspicious. Some people thought he was a genius, and others believed he was a fraud. His invention also attracted a flurry of investors and believers, but also legal challenges that attempted to brand him as a fraud. In one notable case, investor William E. Brooks poured over $300,000 into Meyer's technology, only to sue him later and win a settlement in 1994. But even despite all these unfortunate things happening to Stanley, he never gave up. He was a consistent problem and thorn in your side, and frankly, you had had enough. It was time to settle things once and for all. And March 20th, 1998 was the day Stanley's life would take a dark turn. While dining with his brother Steven, they agreed to meet two Belgian investors at a Grove City Cracker Barrel to discuss his water fuel cell. But after taking a sip of cranberry juice, he suffered a severe, violent reaction. He ran outside grasping his neck for air while profusely vomiting. He was confused until it hit him. He was poisoned. He was screaming that he'd been poisoned before collapsing and dying outside the restaurant. His last words were, "They poisoned me," and Stanley died shortly after. The police looked into everything about Stanley, finding out about secret visitors, governments watching, and big offers for his work. But even with all these stories, the investigation's cause of death was ruled a brain aneurysm. Now, Stanley Meyer is remembered for his big ideas, the mystery of his death, and all the what-ifs about what he was trying to do. And as a big oil company, you would now set a deadly precedent for anyone else who decided to challenge your seat on the throne. The message was simple. You would do anything necessary to kill your competition. Thank you for watching The Dark Side of Dollars, and remember, the truth lies in the details.